Welcome to our podcast on expanding your English vocabulary together.
Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in as we explore 5 versatile expressions and words today.
Today we'll cover the words and phrases on principle, rebel, rebellious, and snob to help new viewers be aware of these vocabs in our podcast. On principle is an idiomatic adverbial phrase.
It means acting based on moral or ethical beliefs rather than convenience.
She refused to accept the gift on principle, believing it might influence her decision.
He won't buy that brand on principle because of its environmental record.
They declined the invitation on principle, opposing the host's policies.
He quit the club on principle when it changed its mission.
She refused overtime on principle, valuing work-life balance.
He doesn't lend money on principle to avoid awkwardness.
They boycott fast fashion on principle to reduce waste.
She won't lie on principle, even if it spares feelings.
He refused the bribe on principle, protecting his integrity.
They avoid tax loopholes on principle to support social services.
She walks to work on principle to lower her carbon footprint.
He refuses to gossip on principle, respecting privacy.
They volunteer regularly on principle to give back.
She left the team on principle when honesty was compromised.
He refuses tipping on principle and supports fair wages instead.
They avoid single-use plastics on principle to protect oceans.
She won't work Sundays on principle to spend time with family.
He refuses to sign contracts with unfair clauses on principle.
They donate anonymously on principle to avoid praise.
She refuses to drive SUVs on principle over emissions concerns.
He won't use cheat sheets on principle to earn grades honestly.
They avoid fast food on principle for health reasons.
She won't engage in price haggling on principle in certain markets.
He refuses to work without proper safety gear on principle.
They exclude certain sponsors on principle from events.
She refuses to recycle in one bin for everything on principle.
He avoids adult language on principle around children.
They won't rush decisions on principle, preferring careful thought.
She paid her own way on principle without sponsorship.
He refuses to use proprietary software on principle for openness.
They never plagiarize on principle despite time pressures.
She won't buy exotic pets on principle to discourage the trade.
He refuses to sign NDAs on principle when transparency matters.
They serve only vegetarian meals on principle at their events.
She won't fast-track projects on principle without proper review.
He avoids paying for news on principle, preferring public sources.
They won't support teams that condone violence on principle.
She refuses to share passwords on principle to protect privacy.
He rejects celebrity endorsements on principle in his marketing.
They refuse to sign autographs on principle to stay humble.
Principle is a noun.
It refers to a fundamental truth, law, or belief that serves as the foundation for behavior or reasoning.
He stands by his principle of honesty in all dealings.
She refused the shortcut, believing in her principle of integrity.
The scientist's work rests on the principle of conservation of energy.
She explained the principle of supply and demand in economics.
His principle of fairness guided his decision-making.
They teach students the principle of respect for others.
The new policy violates the basic principle of equality.
She practices the principle of minimalism in her home.
The principle that water seeks its level is fundamental in physics.
He held fast to the principle that all lives have value.
The engineer designed the bridge on the principle of tensile strength.
She followed the principle that less is more in design.
The principle of free speech underpins the Constitution.
He taught the principle of cause and effect in philosophy.
The charity operates on the principle of transparency.
She based her teaching on the principle of active learning.
The negotiation adhered to the principle of mutual benefit.
He refused to compromise the principle of consent.
The company's principle of sustainability guides its practices.
She cited the principle of least privilege in computer security.
The principle of buoyancy explains why ships float.
He lived by the principle that knowledge is power.
The architect embraced the principle of form follows function.
She followed the principle of charity in her donations.
The court upheld the principle of presumption of innocence.
He studied the principle of relative motion in physics.
The company's reward system reflects a principle of merit.
She explained the principle of opportunity cost in finance.
The coach instilled the principle of teamwork in players.
He abides by the principle of do no harm in medicine.
The entrepreneur cited the principle of customer first in his strategy.
She upheld the principle of journalistic objectivity.
The principle of redox reactions is core to chemistry.
He followed the principle of accessibility in web design.
The leader's principle of service inspired the team.
She explained the principle of compound interest to investors.
The author referenced the principle of the golden ratio in art.
He refused the deal, citing lack of alignment with his principle of fairness.
The students debated ethical principles in philosophy class.
She mapped out core principles for her life goals.
Rebel is both a noun and a verb.
As a noun, it denotes someone who resists authority or tradition. As a verb, it means to resist or defy authority.
The teenage rebel refused to attend the mandatory assembly.
He decided to rebel against the company's dress code.
The historical rebel led a revolt against the crown.
She rebelled when her chores list grew too long.
He admired the rebel musicians who broke musical norms.
They rebelled against outdated educational methods.
The young rebel spray-painted his protest slogan on the wall.
She rebelled by quitting her safe corporate job.
The rebel group refused government orders.
He rebelled when forced to give up his dream project.
A rebel astronaut refused to follow the protocol exactly.
She rebelled by refusing to sign the contract.
The novel's protagonist is a rebel fighting oppression.
He rebelled against his parents' expectations.
The fashion rebel debuted his own punk line.
She rebelled against societal norms by living off-grid.
The rebel lawyer challenged unjust laws.
He rebelled during the historic sit-in at the mall.
The office rebel instituted his own flexible hours.
She rebelled against the ban on her favorite book.
The rebel leader inspired thousands to march.
He rebelled by refusing mandatory overtime.
The cultural rebel introduced avant-garde art exhibits.
She rebelled against formulas in her experimental recipes.
The rebel investor bucked market trends to find value stocks.
He rebelled by learning a banned language at school.
The scientific rebel challenged mainstream theories.
She rebelled against the required textbook, choosing her own readings.
The social rebel organized peaceful sit-ins at City Hall.
He rebelled by refusing to stand for the anthem.
The artistic rebel painted murals on government buildings.
She rebelled by running for office as an independent.
The tech rebel built open-source alternatives to proprietary software.
He rebelled against the strict grading curve by making friends.
The music rebel fused genres to create new sounds.
She rebelled by adopting zero-waste practices at home.
The culinary rebel combined unexpected flavor profiles.
He rebelled against the system by teaching for free online.
The fitness rebel invented unconventional workout routines.
That captures rebel as defiance in many forms.
Rebellious is an adjective.
It describes showing a desire to resist authority, control, or tradition.
The rebellious teen dyed his hair bright green against school rules.
She wrote a rebellious manifesto rejecting mainstream culture.
The crowd's mood turned rebellious when taxes rose sharply.
He adopted a rebellious tone in his protest speech.
The rebellious fashion trend included ripped jeans and leather jackets.
She played rebellious rock music to energize the group.
His rebellious attitude cost him the promotion.
They staged a rebellious sit-in at the coffee shop.
The rebellious graffiti covered nearly every wall downtown.
She wore a rebellious smirk after sneaking into the event.
The novel captures a rebellious spirit among youth.
He admired her rebellious refusal to conform.
The actor's rebellious role challenged social norms.
She penned a rebellious poem critiquing authority.
The music festival had a rebellious vibe all weekend.
He felt rebellious staying up past midnight.
The artist's rebellious installations defied gallery conventions.
She adopted a rebellious stance on environmental policies.
The science club staged a rebellious mock trial of outdated theories.
He wore rebellious slogans on his t-shirt to spark debate.
The film's rebellious lead character resonated with audiences.
She wrote an essay on rebellious children in classical literature.
The tech guru's rebellious hacks broke corporate barriers.
He felt rebellious ordering dessert before dinner.
The protest had a rebellious undercurrent of empowerment.
She adopted a rebellious haircut to mark her independence.
The startup's rebellious ethos challenged industry giants.
He admired her rebellious refusal to wear makeup.
The band's rebellious lyrics spoke to disenfranchised youth.
She staged a rebellious flash mob in the mall.
The novel's protagonist had a rebellious glint in his eye.
He wrote a rebellious letter to the editor of the local paper.
The painter's rebellious strokes broke artistic norms.
She felt rebellious skipping mandatory office meetings.
The choir's rebellious remix surprised traditionalists.
He took rebellious action to bypass red tape.
The youth group had a rebellious energy at the march.
She bought rebellious fashion from independent labels.
The cartoon featured a rebellious sidekick causing chaos.
That's how rebellious describes defiant spirit in actions.
Snob is a noun.
It refers to a person who believes their tastes or status are superior to others.
He's such a coffee snob, refusing instant blends.
She dismissed the crowd as music snobs for hating pop.
Wine snobs often criticize cheaper labels harshly.
He was branded a fashion snob for mocking thrift store finds.
Art snobs sneer at anything outside their preferred style.
She accused him of being a grammar snob for correcting everyone.
He's a tech snob, only using brand name gadgets.
She refuses to be a food snob, enjoying all cuisines.
Book snobs look down on genre fiction without reading it.
He admitted he was a travel snob before finding budget joys.
Wine tasting events attract labeled snobs and novices alike.
She refused to let fashion snobs dictate her style.
He once called me a coffee snob for my single origin beans.
She challenged the wine snob by serving table wine confidently.
He wrote an article challenging elitist art snobs.
She avoided restaurants frequented by wine snobs.
Tech snobs scorn outdated operating systems.
He learned not to be a language snob about accents.
Fashion snobs often overlook sustainable brands.
She rejected the role of a movie snob by loving blockbusters.
Music snobs sometimes miss new talent outside their genre.
He refuses to play the wine snob at company socials.
Coffee snobs debate roast levels endlessly.
She told the art snob to appreciate all styles.
He can't stand grammar snobs correcting casual texts.
She learned humility from meeting non-snob writers.
Booking snobs only stay in Michelin-starred hotels.
He outran the tech snob by creating open-source tools.
Book snobs often miss bestsellers that enlighten many.
She refuses to be a home decor snob about IKEA.
Wine snobs sometimes taste terroir in water.
He jokes about being a minimalist snob with his bare walls.
Coffee shops market to serious snobs and casual drinkers.
She fell in love with indie films despite movie snobs.
Music snobs scorn chart toppers, yet they top charts for reasons.
He avoids being a gym snob who judges others' workouts.
Art snobs critique every brushstroke before stepping back.
She saw herself in the reflection of a wine snob once.
He rejects the tag of design snob after mixing vintage finds.
That shows how snob labels those claiming false superiority.
That concludes our deep dive into these 5 essential English expressions and words.
We hope you feel confident using on principle, rebel, rebellious, and snob in your conversations.
Thank you for listening, and we look forward to sharing more vocabulary insights next time.
Goodbye and keep practicing every day.